the sound of gunfire echoing through the dusty streets of Sierra Vista, New Mexico territory, sent Delilah Dawson diving behind a water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs as splinters of wood exploded above her head. The year was 1878, and death came quick in these parts, but she had not expected it to find her on a Tuesday morning while fetching supplies from the general store. "Get down!" A man's voice shouted, deep and commanding, and suddenly strong arms were pulling her further behind the trough, shielding her body with his own as bullets continued to fly. She caught a glimpse of sun-bronzed skin, a weathered face with striking green eyes, and dark hair beneath a dusty Stetson before he moved away, drawing his revolver with practiced ease. The shooting stopped as quickly as it had begun. Two outlaws lay dead in the street, victims of the sheriff's quick draw, while a third galloped away on horseback, disappearing into the desert landscape beyond town. Delilah found herself still pressed against the stranger who had protected her, her hands clutching the rough fabric of his shirt, her breath coming in short gasps. "You hurt, miss?" he asked, those green eyes searching her face with genuine concern. "No," she managed, though her voice shook. "No, I am fine, thank you for." She trailed off, suddenly aware of how close they were, how solid and warm he felt against her trembling body. He stepped back, giving her space, and tipped his hat. "Samuel Jenkins, madam. I own the Double J Ranch about 5 miles west of town." "Delilah Dawson," she replied, smoothing down her simple calico dress with hands that would not quite steady. "I work at the boarding house on Main Street." Samuel's eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than strictly necessary, taking in the honey-colored hair that had come loose from its pins during the chaos. The wide brown eyes still dilated with fear and something else, something that made her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with the violence they had just witnessed. "Let me walk you back," he offered, extending his arm. "Streets might not be safe for a spell." She should have declined. She had work to do, linens to wash, rooms to clean, meals to prepare for Mrs. Henderson's boarders. But her legs felt unsteady, and the thought of walking alone suddenly seemed unbearable, so she slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow and let him guide her down the wooden sidewalk. "You been in Sierra Vista long?" Samuel asked as they walked, nodding politely to other townsfolk who were emerging cautiously from their hiding spots now that the danger had passed. 3 months, Delilah said. "I came from St. Louis after my father died. There was nothing left for me there, and Mrs. Henderson needed help at the boarding house. She is a distant cousin on my mother's side." "St. Louis," he repeated thoughtfully. "That is quite a change from city life to this desert territory. You have no idea." A small smile tugged at her lips despite the lingering fear. "But I needed the change, needed to leave behind." She stopped herself, surprised she had been about to confide in a complete stranger. There were things in her past she did not speak of, things that had driven her west with barely enough money for the stage fare. Samuel did not press, which she appreciated. Instead, he said, "The desert grows on you. I have been here 8 years now, came from Texas originally. Built the Double J from nothing, and now I have got 200 head of cattle, good water, decent grazing land when the rains come." There was pride in his voice, but not boastfulness, and Delilah found herself wanting to know more about this rancher who had appeared out of nowhere to protect her. They reached the boarding house too quickly, and she found herself reluctant to let go of his arm. "Thank you again, Mr. Jenkins," she said, looking up at him on the shaded porch. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the small scar on his chin, the way his mouth curved slightly upward even when he was not quite smiling. "Samuel," he corrected gently. "And it was my privilege, Miss Dawson. though I wish we had met under better circumstances." "Delilah," she replied, matching his informality, "and yes, preferably without the gunfire next time." "Next time?" His eyes lit up with something that made her heart skip. "Does that mean I might have the pleasure of seeing you again?" She knew she should be cautious. She had learned that lesson the hard way back in St. Louis, had sworn off men entirely after what Thomas had done. But something about Samuel felt different, solid and honest in a way that made her want to take a chance despite her better judgment. "The boarding house serves supper at 6, she heard herself say. "Mrs. Henderson always has room for one more at the table." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the desert. "I will be here." He tipped his hat again and walked away, his long strides confident and sure, and Delilah watched him go until Mrs. Henderson's sharp voice called from inside. "Delilah Dawson, those linens will not wash themselves." The rest of the day passed in a blur of work, but Delilah's mind kept wandering back to green eyes and strong arms, and the way Samuel had not hesitated to put himself between her and danger. Mrs. Henderson noticed her distraction and commented on it with raised eyebrows, but Delilah kept her thoughts to herself, hugging them close like a secret too precious to share just yet. At 5:30, she changed from her work dress into her better one, a deep blue calico that brought out her eyes, and pinned her hair more carefully than usual. Mrs. Henderson noticed that too, but only smiled knowingly and said nothing, which was worse than teasing would have been. Samuel arrived promptly at 6, cleaned up and wearing a different shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. He brought a bottle of wine, which Mrs. Henderson accepted graciously, and charmed her within 5 minutes with his polite manners and genuine interest in her stories about the early days of Sierra Vista. The other boarders were a mix of miners, merchants, and drifters passing through, and they peppered Samuel with questions about ranching, cattle prices, and water rights. He answered patiently, but Delilah noticed the way his eyes kept finding her across the table, how his attention never truly left her even when he was speaking to someone else. After supper, he asked if she might like to take a walk, and Mrs. Henderson gave her blessing with a knowing look that made Delilah's cheeks flush. They strolled down Main Street as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of orange and pink, the heat of the day finally beginning to ease. "Tell me about St. Louis," Samuel said as they walked. "What did you do there before you came west?" Delilah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I worked in a dress shop for a while. My father was a clerk at a shipping company, but he took ill with pneumonia last winter. The medical bills took everything we had, and after he died, I found myself with no family and no prospects." It was the truth, just not all of it. She did not mention Thomas, the merchant's son who had courted her with pretty words and promises, who had convinced her they would marry, and she should trust him with her virtue. She did not mention how he had abandoned her the moment his father arranged a more profitable match with a banker's daughter, or how the scandal had cost her the dress shop position and her reputation. "I am sorry about your father," Samuel said quietly. "Loss like that, it changes a person." "It does," she agreed, grateful he could not see her face clearly in the growing darkness. "What about you? You said you came from Texas. Do you have family there?" "Not anymore." His voice held old pain carefully controlled. "My parents died when I was 16, cholera outbreak in our town. My sister married a farmer and moved to Kansas. We write sometimes, but it has been years since I saw her last." They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open desert, and by unspoken agreement they stopped, looking out at the vast expanse of land turning purple in the twilight. "It is beautiful here," Delilah said softly. "Harsh but beautiful." like it does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. Samuel turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw understanding that went deeper than words. I felt that way too when I first came, like the desert was honest in a way people often are not. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and the beginning of something neither could quite name yet. Then Samuel cleared his throat and said, "I should get you back before Mrs. Henderson worries. But Delilah, I would very much like to see you again, maybe on Sunday. I could take you for a ride, show you some of the country around here if you would like." "I would like that very much," she replied, and meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. The days until Sunday passed with agonizing slowness. Delilah threw herself into her work, but her thoughts kept drifting to Samuel, to the way he had looked at her, the gentleness in his voice despite his obvious strength. Mrs. Henderson teased her good-naturedly about being smitten, and Delilah could not even deny it. Saturday evening brought unexpected excitement when a dusty cowboy arrived at the boarding house with a message. Mrs. Henderson called Delilah down from hanging laundry upstairs, and the cowboy, who introduced himself as Pete from the Double J Ranch, handed her a carefully wrapped package. "Boss wanted you to have this," Pete said with a grin. "Said to tell you he is looking forward to tomorrow." Inside the package, Delilah found a beautiful split riding skirt made of soft leather, dyed a rich brown and decorated with delicate stitching along the seams. It must have cost Samuel a significant sum, and the gesture made her throat tight with emotion. No one had given her anything so thoughtful, so perfectly suited to her needs, in longer than she could remember. She wrote a thank-you note that she labored over for an hour, trying to strike the right tone between gratitude and propriety, and gave it to Pete to take back to Samuel. Then she tried on the riding skirt in her small room and admired herself in the mirror, imagining the day ahead with a flutter of anticipation that was equal parts excitement and nervousness. Sunday dawned clear and warm, as most days did in the New Mexico territory. Delilah dressed carefully in the new riding skirt and a white blouse, braiding her hair to keep it manageable in the wind. Samuel arrived with 2 horses, a gentle mare for her and his own large gelding, and the approval in his eyes when he saw her in the riding skirt made all her careful preparation worthwhile. "You look perfect," he said simply, helping her mount with hands that lingered just a moment at her waist. They rode west out of Sierra Vista, leaving the town behind for the open desert. Samuel kept their pace easy, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the land, the occasional ranch they passed, the dry creek beds that would run wild with water during the summer monsoons. "The desert seems empty at first," he said as they paused at the top of a rise, looking out over miles of rolling terrain dotted with mesquite and creosote bushes. "But once you learn to see it properly, it is full of life. Jackrabbits and quail, coyotes and hawks, snakes and lizards. Everything adapted to survive in harsh conditions, everything finding its own way to thrive. Like the people here," Delilah observed. "Everyone I have met in Sierra Vista has a story of loss or hardship that brought them west, but they have found a way to build new lives to start over." "Is that what you are doing?" Samuel asked, turning in his saddle to look at her. "Starting over," she met his gaze steadily. "Yes, I left behind some things in St. Louis that I am not proud of, some mistakes I made. I needed a place where no one knew my history, where I could be just Delilah again, without the weight of other people's judgments." "We all have things we are not proud of," Samuel said quietly. "The man I killed in a fight in Texas, that was self-defense, but it still haunts me some nights. The winter I lost a quarter of my herd because I was too stubborn to ask for help when I needed it. The woman I thought I loved who married my best friend because ranching was not grand enough for her ambitions." He paused, then added, But those things, they made me who I am. I do not think I would erase them even if I could. You are wise, Delilah said, feeling something loosen in her chest. I have spent so much time wishing I could undo my mistakes, go back and make different choices. But maybe you are right. Maybe we need our scars to appreciate the healing. They rode on, and the conversation flowed easier now, both of them sharing pieces of their pasts like gifts, slowly building trust. Samuel told her about building his ranch from nothing, about sleeping under the stars those first hard years, because he could not afford lumber for a house, about the first spring when the rains came and his cattle grew fat on the new grass, and he knew he was going to make it after all. Delilah found herself telling him things she had not planned to share, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her father's slow decline after, about the loneliness of being young and female in a city where respectability mattered more than truth. She did not tell him about Thomas yet, but she sensed that day would come too, that Samuel was the kind of man who would want to know all of her, even the ugly parts. They stopped by a small spring where cottonwood trees provided shade and the horses could drink. Samuel spread a blanket on the ground and unpacked a lunch of bread, cheese, cold chicken, and apples. They ate sitting side by side, their shoulders almost touching, and Delilah felt more content than she had in years. "Can I ask you something?" Samuel said as they were finishing. "That first day in town during the shooting, you seemed almost unsurprised by the violence, like you had seen trouble before." Delilah was quiet for a moment, considering how much to reveal. Then she said, "There was a man in St. Louis, Thomas was his name. He courted me properly, or so I thought, made promises about marriage and a future together. I believed him, trusted him with things I should not have trusted him with." She took a breath, pushing past the old shame. "When his father arranged a more advantageous match for him, Thomas dropped me without a backward glance. The scandal ruined my reputation, cost me my position at the dress shop. I learned then that danger comes in many forms, not just bullets and outlaws." Samuel's hand found hers on the blanket, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "He was a fool," he said fiercely. "Any man who could walk away from you is a damned fool who does not deserve what he threw away." Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes, unexpected and hot. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Samuel said. "I know you are brave and honest and not afraid of hard work. I know you have been hurt, but you still took a chance on having supper with a strange rancher. I know when I look at you, I see someone I want to know better, to spend time with too." He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "Sorry, I am moving too fast. My sister always said I was too direct for polite company." "No," Delilah said quickly, squeezing his hand. "Please do not apologize. I like your directness. After Thomas and his pretty lies, I appreciate a man who says what he means." They sat there by the spring for a long while, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing. Samuel told her about his dreams for the Double J, about wanting to breed horses as well as cattle, about maybe one day having a family to pass the ranch down to. Delilah shared her love of reading, how she had devoured every book she could borrow back in St. Louis, how she missed having access to a real library. "I have books," Samuel said. "Not many, but I could lend them to you. And maybe, if you would like, you could visit the ranch sometime, see what I have built." "I would love that," Delilah said. And when Samuel leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, she met him halfway. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, both of them testing this new territory. His lips were warm and soft despite the harsh sun and wind he worked in every day, and his hand came up to cup her face with such tenderness that Delilah felt something crack open in her chest. Some wall she had built after Thomas that suddenly did not seem necessary anymore. When they pulled apart, Samuel was smiling, a real full smile that transformed his serious face into something boyish and joyful. "I have been wanting to do that since I first saw you," he admitted. "Only since then," Delilah teased, surprising herself with her own boldness. "I have been wanting it since at least Tuesday afternoon." He laughed, a warm, rich sound, and kissed her again, longer this time, and Delilah let herself sink into it, into the promise of something new and precious and worth protecting. They rode back to Sierra Vista as the sun was setting, and Samuel walked her to the boarding house door reluctantly, clearly not wanting the day to end. "Can I see you again soon?" he asked. "Maybe Tuesday after you finish work. We could have supper at the hotel restaurant." "Yes," Delilah agreed without hesitation. "I would like that very much." Over the following weeks, Samuel became a regular fixture in Delilah's life. He came to town twice a week for supper, sometimes taking her to the hotel restaurant, sometimes eating at the boarding house where Mrs. Henderson fussed over him like he was already family. On Sundays, weather permitting, they would ride out into the desert together, exploring the territory, and Samuel teaching Delilah about ranching, cattle, horses, and the rhythms of desert life. Delilah found herself falling for him in a way that was entirely different from her infatuation with Thomas. What she felt for Samuel was deeper, built on genuine friendship and respect and shared values. She loved his quiet competence, the way he treated his ranch hands with fairness and dignity, how he always kept his word no matter how inconvenient. She loved his dry sense of humor that emerged once he was comfortable, the way he listened to her opinions and actually seemed to value them, how he touched her like she was something precious. Samuel was equally smitten, though he expressed it differently. He brought her books from his collection, remembering every offhand comment she made about authors or subjects that interested her. He showed up at the boarding house one day with lumber and tools, and spent his afternoon off repairing the loose boards on the front porch that Mrs. Henderson had been complaining about for months. He was patient with her lingering nervousness about physical intimacy, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, content to steal kisses on the porch and hold her hand during their rides. 2 months after they met, Samuel invited Delilah to visit the Double J Ranch properly. She arranged a rare full day off with Mrs. Henderson, who sent them away with a packed lunch and a knowing smile that made Delilah blush to her roots. The ranch exceeded Delilah's expectations. Samuel had built a solid 2-room house with a covered porch facing east to catch the morning sun, a barn large enough for 12 horses, corrals for working cattle, and a bunkhouse for his ranch hands. Everything was well maintained, showing the pride Samuel took in his work and his property. He gave her a tour of everything, introducing her to his 3 ranch hands with obvious respect for their skills. Jake was an older cowboy who had worked ranches from Texas to Montana and knew more about cattle than most men forgot in a lifetime. Young Billy was only 19 but could rope and ride with the best of them. And Chen, who had come from California after the railroad work dried up, had a gift for handling horses that bordered on magic. The men were polite to Delilah, but also warm, clearly approving of Samuel's choice, and she felt herself relaxing into the rhythm of ranch life. She helped Samuel feed the horses, laughing when his favorite mare lipped at her hand looking for treats. She watched Billy and Jake work a stubborn calf that had gotten separated from its mother, impressed by their skill and teamwork. She sat on the porch with Samuel as the sun set, drinking coffee and talking about the future in a way that felt natural and right. "I want to show you something," Samuel said as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. He led her around the house to the west side, where the land sloped gently down toward a dry creek bed lined with cottonwood trees. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," he said quietly. "Come spring, if the monsoons are good, that creek will run and the whole area will be green. Wildflowers everywhere, so many colors you would not believe it. Indian paintbrush and Mexican gold poppies, lupines and desert marigolds." Delilah could picture it, the harsh desert landscape transformed by rain and bloom. "It must be beautiful." "It is," Samuel agreed. "But I realized this year when the flowers came that I was looking at them and thinking how I wished you were there to see them with me. That is when I knew." "Knew what?" Delilah asked, though her heart was already racing. Samuel turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "That I love you, that I want you here not just for a day visit but always, that this ranch does not feel complete without you in it." He paused, searching her face in the starlight. "I know we have only known each other a few months. I know you might need more time. But Delilah, I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of how I feel about you." Tears sprang to Delilah's eyes, but they were good tears, tears of joy and relief in coming home after a long, hard journey. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I did not think I could feel this way again, not after everything. But you showed me that not all men are like Thomas, that trust is still possible, that I deserve to be treated well and loved truly." Samuel pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Delilah buried her face in his chest, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had not felt since her mother was alive. They stood there under the stars for a long time, holding each other, and Delilah felt pieces of herself that had been broken starting to knit back together. The ride back to town that evening was quiet but comfortable, both of them lost in their own thoughts but together in their happiness. When Samuel left her at the boarding house, he kissed her good night with a tenderness that made her melt, and she went to bed that night feeling like her life was finally heading in the right direction. The next few weeks passed in a haze of happiness. Samuel started making plans for the future, talking about expanding the house to add more rooms, about buying breeding stock for his horse operation, about all the things they would do together. Delilah started teaching herself to cook better, borrowing Mrs. Henderson's recipes and practicing on the boarding house residents, determined to be a good ranch wife when the time came. But the time came sooner than either of them expected, brought on by circumstances neither could have predicted. It started with a letter that arrived for Delilah on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The envelope was expensive paper, the handwriting elegant, and it bore a St. Louis postmark that made her stomach clench with dread. Mrs. Henderson brought it to her while she was hanging laundry in the yard, and Delilah nearly dropped the clothespins when she saw the return address. Thomas Caldwell. She sat down hard on the porch steps, the letter trembling in her hands. Mrs. Henderson took one look at her face and disappeared inside, giving her privacy. Delilah broke the seal with shaking fingers and read words that made her blood run cold. Thomas wrote that his marriage had ended, that his wife had left him for a railroad baron, that he had been thinking about Delilah constantly. He claimed to have made a terrible mistake in choosing money over love, insisted that he had never stopped caring for her. He was coming to Sierra Vista, the letter said, to make things right between them, to offer her the marriage he should have given her 2 years ago. He would arrive within the week. Delilah felt sick. The audacity of the man, to think she would just forgive and forget, to assume she had been waiting around pining for him. But more than anger, she felt fear. Thomas was persistent and entitled, used to getting what he wanted. She had no doubt he would make trouble, would try to convince her or manipulate her, or perhaps even spread more lies about her character if she refused him. She needed to tell Samuel. needed his strength and support and the solid certainty of his love to face this ghost from her past. But Samuel was at the ranch, and she could not leave the boarding house until her work was done for the day. The hours until evening dragged by with agonizing slowness. Samuel knew something was wrong the moment he saw her that night. Delilah had sent word with a boy from town asking him to come as soon as possible, and he had ridden in immediately, leaving his supper half-eaten. They walked down to the edge of town, away from curious ears, and Delilah handed him the letter with hands that would not quite steady. She watched his face as he read, saw his jaw tighten with anger, the dangerous glint that came into his green eyes. When he finished, he looked at her with such fierce protectiveness that it took her breath away. "He is not taking you anywhere," Samuel said flatly. "I do not care what claims he thinks he has. You are mine and I am yours, and that bastard can rot in hell before I let him hurt you again." "I am not afraid of him," Delilah said, though that was not entirely true. "But I am afraid of the scandal he might cause, the lies he might tell. What if he ruins my reputation here like he did in St. Louis? What if people start looking at me differently, whispering?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "Marry me." Delilah blinked. "What, marry me?" Samuel repeated, taking her hands. "Not next month or next spring when the wildflowers bloom, though God knows I wanted to wait and propose properly. But marry me now this week, before that snake arrives. Marry me and become Mrs. Samuel Jenkins, and then no one can say a damned thing about your past because you will be a respectable married woman, a rancher's wife." "Samuel, I cannot let you do this just to protect me from Thomas," Delilah protested, even as her heart soared at the prospect. "You deserve better than a rushed wedding because of scandal." "You are not hearing me," Samuel said, cupping her face in his hands. "I want to marry you. I have wanted it since that second Sunday when you laughed at my bad joke about the stubborn mule, and I realized I could spend my whole life trying to make you laugh like that. This just moves up the timeline. So, what do you say, Delilah Dawson? Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that not all men are liars and cowards?" The tears came then, hot and fast, years of pain and disappointment and fear washing away in the face of Samuel's solid, honest love. "Yes," she said through the tears. "Yes, I will marry you." Samuel kissed her, right there at the edge of town where anyone might see, kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, and Delilah kissed him back with everything in her, pouring all her love and trust and hope into it. They made plans quickly. There was a circuit preacher due in Sierra Vista on Saturday, just 3 days away. Mrs. Henderson, when told of their decision, clapped her hands with delight and immediately began organizing, enlisting the other women in town to help prepare. Billy and Jake would stand up with Samuel, while Mrs. Henderson and her friend Martha would stand with Delilah. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Delilah had no time to dwell on Thomas's impending arrival, too busy with preparations. Mrs. Henderson produced a beautiful cream-colored dress that had belonged to her daughter, carefully preserved in a trunk, and it fit Delilah perfectly with only minor alterations. The women of Sierra Vista, most of whom Delilah knew only in passing from the general store and church services, rallied around her with surprising warmth, bringing small gifts and offering advice, and generally making her feel welcomed and valued in a way St. Louis never had. Samuel came to town on Friday to obtain the marriage license and make final arrangements. He found Delilah in the boarding house kitchen, up to her elbows in bread dough, and the look of absolute joy on his face made her breath catch. "Tomorrow," he said wonderingly, "tomorrow you will be my wife." "Tomorrow," she agreed, abandoning the dough to go to him, not caring about the flour she was getting on his clean shirt. "Are you having second thoughts?" "Not a single one," Samuel said firmly. "Only regret is that we are doing this rushed instead of proper. You deserve romance, Delilah. Deserve to be courted slow and married with all the trimmings." "We will have a lifetime for romance," Delilah said, touching his face gently. "And as for trimmings, I have everything I need. I have you." Saturday dawned clear and beautiful, the October heat less oppressive than the summer had been, the sky that perfect impossible blue that only seemed to exist in the desert. Delilah woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and anticipation. Mrs. Henderson brought her breakfast in bed, an unheard of luxury, and sat with her while she picked at the food, too excited to eat properly. "You are doing the right thing, you know," Mrs. Henderson said, watching her with kind eyes. "Samuel Jenkins is a good man, one of the best I have known in my 60 years on this earth. He will treat you right." "I know," Delilah said softly. "I never thought I would trust a man again after Thomas, but Samuel is different. He makes me want to be brave again." The ceremony was set for 2 o'clock at the small church on the edge of town. Martha and Mrs. Henderson helped Delilah dress, pinning her hair in an elaborate style and weaving in small white flowers that Martha had somehow procured despite the season. The cream dress fit perfectly, making Delilah feel beautiful and bridal and ready for this new chapter. As they left the boarding house for the short walk to the church, a familiar voice called out from across the street, and Delilah's heart sank. Thomas Caldwell stood there, looking exactly as she remembered him, tall, handsome in a polished way, expensively dressed even after days of travel. His eyes swept over her wedding dress and his face darkened with anger. "Delilah," he said, striding toward them, "what is the meaning of this? You cannot marry some frontier rancher. I came all this way to make things right between us." "There is nothing to make right," Delilah said, surprised by how steady her voice was. "You made your choice 2 years ago, Thomas. I have made mine now." "You do not understand," Thomas insisted, reaching for her arm. Mrs. Henderson stepped between them with surprising speed for a woman her age, her eyes flashing dangerously. "You will not touch her," the older woman said with steel in her voice. "You lost any right to that long ago. Now I suggest you leave before the sheriff decides to become involved." Thomas looked around and seemed to realize for the first time that they had drawn an audience. Townsfolk had emerged from shops and houses, watching the confrontation with unfriendly eyes. In the West, a man who mistreated a woman was not looked upon favorably, and word of why Delilah had fled St. Louis had clearly spread. "This is not over, Delilah," Thomas said, but there was desperation in his voice now rather than confidence. "You are making a mistake." "The only mistake I made was trusting you in the first place," Delilah replied. "But I learned from it. Now please leave. I have a wedding to attend." She walked past him without a backward glance, head held high, and the small group of townsfolk actually applauded. Mrs. Henderson and Martha flanked her protectively as they continued to the church, and Delilah felt a surge of gratitude for this community that had embraced her, defended her, accepted her as one of their own. Samuel was waiting at the church, pacing nervously in the small vestibule with Jake and Billy trying unsuccessfully to calm him down. When he saw Delilah, his face transformed, all the worry replaced with such naked love and awe that Delilah felt tears threaten. "You are so beautiful," he said hoarsely. "Delilah, I am the luckiest man alive." "I saw Thomas outside," she told him quietly, needing him to know. "He tried to stop me, but it is all right. I sent him away." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you, threaten you?" "Because if he did, I will." "He did nothing," Delilah interrupted, placing her hand on his chest to feel his rapid heartbeat calm under her touch. He is nothing to me now. You are everything, Samuel. Let us get married." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. The preacher, a kind-faced man named Reverend Matthews, spoke about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Samuel's voice was strong and sure when he said his vows, his eyes never leaving Delilah's face. When it came her turn, Delilah found herself choking up with emotion, but she pushed through, promising to love and honor Samuel for all her days. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews said with a warm smile. "Samuel, you may kiss your bride." Samuel did, thoroughly and tenderly, to the applause and whoops of the assembled townsfolk who had crowded into the small church. When they finally broke apart, Delilah was crying happy tears, and Samuel's eyes were suspiciously bright as well. They walked out of the church together as husband and wife, and Delilah felt something settle in her chest, some piece of herself that had been restless and hurting for years, finally coming to rest. This was home now. Samuel and Sierra Vista, and the vast desert that had seemed so frightening when she first arrived but now felt like protection, like space to breathe and grow and become who she was meant to be. The town had prepared a celebration at the hotel, nothing fancy but generous with food and drink and well wishes. People Delilah barely knew came up to congratulate them, to welcome her to the community as Mrs. Jenkins, to tell Samuel he was a lucky man and had better treat his bride right or answer to them. The warmth and acceptance made Delilah's eyes sting with fresh tears more than once. Thomas appeared briefly at the edge of the celebration, watching with an expression Delilah could not quite read. But he did not approach, and eventually he turned and walked away toward the livery stable, presumably to arrange passage on the next stage back to St. Louis. Delilah felt a door close in her heart as she watched him go, a final severing of that painful chapter of her life. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked, coming up beside her and wrapping his arm around her waist. "I am perfect," Delilah said honestly. "I thought seeing him would hurt more, would bring back all that pain and shame, but all I feel is grateful that things happened the way they did. If Thomas had not betrayed me, I never would have come west. I never would have met you." "Then I suppose I owe the bastard a debt of thanks," Samuel said dryly, "though I will never tell him that." They stayed at the celebration until sunset, then rode out to the Double J Ranch together, Delilah riding beside Samuel on her gentle mare, now wearing her wedding dress and feeling like a princess from one of the fairy tales her mother used to read her. The ranch hands had made themselves scarce for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy, and Samuel carried Delilah over the threshold of their home with such reverence that she fell in love with him all over again. Their wedding night was everything Delilah had hoped for, and nothing like her experience with Thomas. Samuel was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished and desired. There was passion, too, building slowly between them, but it was grounded in love and trust and genuine care for each other's pleasure and comfort. Afterward, lying in Samuel's arms in the darkness, listening to his steady heartbeat, Delilah finally understood what it meant to be truly intimate with another person, to give yourself completely and have that gift honored and treasured. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Samuel replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for trusting me, Delilah, for taking a chance on a rancher with dirt under his fingernails and big dreams." "Your dreams are my dreams now," Delilah said. "We will build this ranch together, make it into something wonderful. I am not afraid of hard work." "I know," Samuel said with a smile she could hear in his voice. "That is one of the many things I love about you." They fell asleep tangled together, and Delilah slept more peacefully than she had in years. No nightmares or worries to trouble her rest. The next months were an adjustment as Delilah learned the rhythms of ranch life and settled into her role as Samuel's wife. She had been honest about not knowing much about ranching, but she threw herself into learning with the same determination she had brought to everything else in her life. Chen taught her the basics of horse care and handling. Jake shared his knowledge about cattle and range management. Billy, despite being younger than her, patiently explained the financial side of running a ranch, the careful balance of expenses and income that could make or break an operation. Samuel was an excellent teacher as well, never condescending or impatient when she made mistakes. He showed her how to read the land for water and good grazing, how to spot a sick cow before it became a serious problem, how to judge the quality of hay and grain for winter feeding. In turn, Delilah took over management of the household, using her organizational skills to run things more efficiently, and started a vegetable garden that would help feed not just them, but the ranch hands as well. Winter in the desert was milder than St. Louis winters, but still cold, especially at night. Delilah learned to love the cozy evenings by the fireplace, reading aloud to Samuel from the books they both enjoyed, planning improvements to the ranch for spring. Samuel was teaching her to play chess, and their competitive matches often dissolved into laughter and kisses that led to other activities entirely. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly with the ranch hands, exchanging small gifts and enjoying a feast that Delilah had spent days preparing with advice from Mrs. Henderson. Samuel gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal for writing, remembering a comment she had made months ago about enjoying putting her thoughts on paper. She gave him a new wool coat she had secretly been sewing for weeks, lined with soft flannel and sturdy enough for the coldest winter mornings. The new year of 1879 arrived with promise and possibility. Samuel's horse breeding operation was beginning to take shape, with several promising young colts born that spring. The cattle herd had weathered the winter well, and prices were good. Delilah's garden flourished under her careful tending, and she found satisfaction in this physical labor, in watching things grow through her own effort. In March, Delilah missed her monthly courses and realized with a mixture of joy and terror that she was likely pregnant. She waited another month to be certain before telling Samuel, not wanting to raise false hopes. But when her courses failed to arrive again and she started experiencing morning sickness, she could no longer deny the reality. She told Samuel one evening after supper, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and gold. "I have something important to tell you," she began. Suddenly nervous despite knowing he would be thrilled, Samuel turned to her with concern. "What is wrong? Are you feeling ill? You have been pale lately." "I am pregnant," Delilah blurted out, unable to think of a more graceful way to share the news. "The baby should come sometime in October, I think." The expression on Samuel's face went through several stages: shock, disbelief, then pure radiant joy. He let out a whoop that startled the horses in the corral and swept Delilah into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests to be careful. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are having a baby. Delilah, you have made me the happiest man on earth." "You are happy then?" she asked unnecessarily, seeing the joy written all over his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Samuel said, setting her down gently and immediately becoming worried. "Should you be sitting down? Are you drinking enough water? Maybe you should not be doing so much work in the garden." "I am pregnant, not fragile," Delilah laughed, touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." But Samuel insisted on coddling her anyway, taking over some of her heavier chores despite her protests, making sure she rested in the heat of the afternoon, bringing her treats from town. The ranch hands were equally protective once they learned the news, with Jake appointing himself as her unofficial guardian and Billy nearly falling over himself to help with anything she needed. The months of her pregnancy passed peacefully. Delilah bloomed with the baby growing inside her body changing in ways that Samuel seemed to find endlessly fascinating and beautiful. He would place his hands on her swelling belly and talk to the baby, telling it about the ranch and the horses and how loved it was already. In May, the wildflowers Samuel had promised came, transforming the desert into a riot of color. Mexican gold poppies painted the hillsides orange, while purple lupines clustered near the creek. Indian paintbrush added splashes of red, and desert marigolds glowed yellow in the sun. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and one Sunday Samuel rode out with Delilah to the spot where he had first told her he loved her. "This is what I wanted you to see," he said, gesturing at the carpet of flowers stretching in every direction. "This is the beauty I wanted to share with you." "It is perfect," Delilah said, tears coming to her eyes though she blamed them on her pregnancy emotions. "Everything about this life we have built is perfect, Samuel. Even the hard parts, the struggles, they are worth it because we are facing them together." Samuel dismounted and helped her down carefully, then led her to a spot where the flowers grew particularly thick. He picked a handful of the most beautiful blooms, creating an impromptu bouquet of gold poppies, purple lupines, red paintbrush, and yellow marigolds. Then, to Delilah's shock, he went down on one knee in front of her. "I know we are already married," he said, a slight smile playing at his lips. "But I promised you romance and I wanted to propose properly. So Delilah Jenkins, love of my life, mother of my child, will you continue to be my wife? Will you let me spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me?" Delilah was crying openly now, but they were tears of overwhelming joy, of gratitude, of a heart that had been shattered and betrayed finally finding its way to healing and peace. "Yes," she said through the tears. "Yes, Samuel, always yes." He stood and handed her the wildflower bouquet, then kissed her with such tenderness and passion that Delilah felt her knees go weak. When they finally broke apart, she held the flowers close, breathing in their sweet fragrance, and felt every painful experience that had brought her to this moment was worth it. The betrayal, the scandal, the lonely journey west, all of it had led her here to this man, this place, this life that was more than she had ever dared to dream. They stayed among the wildflowers for hours, lying on a blanket Samuel had thoughtfully brought, talking about the future. They discussed names for the baby, argued good-naturedly about whether it would be a boy or girl. Samuel confessed his hope that their child would grow up with siblings, with brothers and sisters to play with and rely on. Delilah agreed, surprised by how much she wanted that too, a house full of children and laughter and love. As the sun began to set and they prepared to ride back to the ranch, Delilah took one last look at the field of wildflowers. She knew she would remember this moment forever, standing among the blooms with Samuel's impromptu proposal and her tears of happiness. It felt like a full-circle moment, from the girl who had arrived in Sierra Vista broken and afraid to the woman she was now. Loved, valued, secure in ways she had never been before. The remainder of Delilah's pregnancy passed without incident. As summer gave way to fall and the October heat began to ease, she felt the baby drop lower, a sign that labor would begin soon. Mrs. Henderson came to stay at the ranch for the last few weeks, bringing her midwifing experience and calm competence. Samuel hovered anxiously, driving everyone slightly crazy with his worry, until Jake finally took him aside and suggested he focus his energy on preparing the nursery they had added to the house, rather than pestering Delilah every 5 minutes. Labor began on a cool October evening, just as the sun was setting. Delilah's water broke while she was helping prepare supper, and the cramps that had been bothering her all day suddenly intensified into real contractions. Samuel immediately went pale and seemed on the verge of panic, but Mrs. Henderson took charge with brisk efficiency, getting Delilah settled in the bedroom and sending Billy to fetch the doctor from town just in case. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Delilah had known intellectually that childbirth was difficult, but the reality was something else entirely. There were moments when she was certain she could not do it, could not endure another contraction, but Mrs. Henderson coached her through each wave of pain, while Samuel held her hand and murmured encouragement, even though his own face was white with fear for her. Finally, as the sun was setting again nearly 24 hours after labor began, Delilah gave one final push and heard the beautiful sound of a baby crying. Mrs. Henderson announced, "It is a boy," with satisfaction, and Samuel let out a choked sob of relief and joy. The baby was placed on Delilah's chest, still covered in blood and vernix, tiny and perfect and absolutely beautiful. He had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, Delilah saw they were blue like most newborns, but she suspected they would eventually turn green like his father's. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have been waiting for you." Samuel leaned over them both, his hand gentle on the baby's head. "He is perfect," he said in awe. "Delilah, you are amazing. Thank you for this gift." They named him James Thomas Jenkins, James for Samuel's father and Thomas for Delilah's, reclaiming that name from the man who had hurt her and giving it new meaning in this new life. Little James was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches, and Delilah found herself adapting to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. Samuel was a devoted father from the first moment, taking his turn walking the floor with James when he was fussy, changing nappies without complaint, sitting with Delilah during the long night feedings just to keep her company. Watching him with their son made Delilah fall in love with him all over again. The years that followed were good ones. The Double J Ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's careful management. His horse breeding operation gained a reputation for quality, with buyers coming from as far as Texas and California to purchase his stock. The cattle herd grew steadily, and Samuel bought additional land to expand their grazing territory. When James was 2, Delilah found herself pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy felt easier, her body knowing what to do. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Samuel's mother, was born in the spring of 1882. She had Delilah's honey-colored hair and her father's green eyes, and she wrapped Samuel around her tiny finger from day one. 2 more children followed in the next years. Another boy they named Daniel in 1884, and finally, another daughter, Grace, in 1886. The house was full of laughter and chaos, and the beautiful mess of family life. Delilah sometimes marveled at how different her life had turned out from what she had imagined in those dark days after Thomas's betrayal. How much richer and fuller it was than any future she could have planned for herself. Samuel remained the steady, loving partner he had been from the beginning. Even after years of marriage, he still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He still brought her wildflowers every spring, remembered every anniversary and birthday, supported her when she decided to teach the ranch children reading and arithmetic in their home a few days a week. Delilah grew into her role as a rancher's wife with confidence and competence. She learned to do things she never would have imagined back in St. Louis. helping to pull a breached calf, breaking horses alongside Chen, even learning to shoot well enough that Samuel trusted her to defend the ranch if necessary. But she also maintained the parts of herself that had nothing to do with ranching: her love of reading and learning, her interest in politics and current events, her need for quiet contemplation sometimes. The children grew healthy and strong, shaped by the desert and ranch life into resilient, capable young people. James had his father's serious nature and love of the land, clearly destined to take over the ranch someday. Sarah was spirited and independent, determined to do everything her brothers did and often succeeding. Daniel was the dreamer, always with his nose in a book or asking questions about the world beyond New Mexico. And Grace, the baby, was sunshine personified, bringing joy to everyone around her with her infectious laughter. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel insisted on recreating their wedding day as much as possible. He arranged for them to ride out to the Wildflower meadow, which was in bloom again, and they left the children with Mrs. Henderson, who was now living semi-permanently at the ranch helping with the household and the young ones. The meadow was just as beautiful as Delilah remembered, perhaps even more so because of all the memories now associated with it. Samuel spread a blanket in the flowers and they sat together, watching the desert landscape shimmer in the heat. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked suddenly. "Giving up city life for this? Marrying a rancher and ending up with 4 children and a house full of chaos?" Delilah looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? Samuel, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. This life, our family, the ranch, all of it, this is everything I never knew I wanted but needed desperately. Even though it was rushed, even though I proposed with wildflowers instead of a proper ring," Delilah took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Especially because of that. You showed me that romance is not about expensive gifts or grand gestures. It is about everyday love, about choosing each other every day, about building a life together through all the struggles and joys. That bouquet of wildflowers meant more to me than any diamond ring could have." Samuel pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I look at you and I still cannot believe you are mine, that you chose me, chose this life. You could have gone back to St. Louis after Thomas came, could have believed his promises. I chose you because you showed me what real love looks like," Delilah said firmly. "You were patient with my fears, gentle with my wounds, steady when I was uncertain. You made me feel valued for who I am, not who I could pretend to be. That is worth more than all the wealth and sophistication St. Louis could ever offer." They lay back in the flowers, looking up at the endless blue sky, and Delilah thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain of betrayal, the humiliation of scandal, the fear of starting over in an unknown place. But also the courage it took to board that stage west, the determination to build a new life, the willingness to trust again despite every reason not to. "You remember that first day?" Samuel asked, echoing her thoughts. "When the shooting started and I pulled you behind the water trough. I remember thinking you had the greenest eyes I had ever seen," Delilah admitted with a laugh. "Even in the middle of being terrified, I noticed that. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever laid eyes on," Samuel said. "But more than that, I remember how you did not fall apart after. You were shaken but steady, scared but brave. I knew right then you were someone special. We have built something good here, have we not?" Delilah said softly. "Not just the ranch, though I am proud of that too. But our family, our life together. We took 2 broken people and made something whole." "We did," Samuel agreed. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us, Delilah. Years of watching our children grow, of building this ranch bigger and better, of growing old together." The thought filled Delilah with warmth and contentment. She had a sudden vivid image of them years from now, white-haired and wrinkled, sitting on the porch and watching grandchildren play in the yard. It was a beautiful image, full of peace and love and the satisfaction of a life well lived. As the sun began to set, painting the wildflowers in shades of gold and crimson, Samuel stood and offered Delilah his hand. "Come on, Mrs. Jenkins, let us go home to our children." Delilah took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, let us go home." They rode back to the ranch together, just as they had ridden away from Sierra Vista on their wedding day 10 years before. But this time, they were riding toward something rather than away, toward children waiting for their parents, toward a house full of love and laughter, toward a future that stretched out bright and promising before them. When they arrived home, the children came running out to greet them, and Delilah and Samuel were swept up in the beautiful chaos of family life. James wanted to show his father the new colt that had been born that morning. Sarah had made a drawing she was bursting to share. Daniel had questions about a book he was reading, and Grace simply wanted to be picked up and cuddled. Delilah stood in the doorway watching Samuel juggle all 4 children's demands with patient good humor, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. This was her life now, messy and loud and sometimes overwhelming, but also filled with more love than she had ever thought possible. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Delilah and Samuel sat on their porch as they did most evenings, enjoying the cool desert air. Samuel had his arm around her, and Delilah leaned into his solid warmth, feeling safe and cherished and home. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" Samuel asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "For finding me that day in Sierra Vista, for being patient with me, for showing me what love is supposed to look like, for giving me this life, this family, this peace." "I should be thanking you," Samuel countered. "You took a chance on a simple rancher when you deserved so much more. You turned this house into a home, gave me children I love more than life itself, made every day brighter just by being in it." "We saved each other, I think," Delilah said. 2 people who had been hurt and lost, finding each other at exactly the right moment. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Delilah thought about that scared, broken girl who had arrived in Sierra Vista all those years ago, and the woman she had become. She thought about Thomas, and the pain he had caused, and how that pain had ultimately led her here to something infinitely better than what she had lost. The desert stretched out around them, harsh and beautiful and honest, and Delilah understood what Samuel had meant all those years ago about the land not pretending to be anything other than what it was. That was what she had found here in New Mexico. Authenticity, a place where she could be wholly herself without pretense or performance. And she had found Samuel, who loved her not despite her scars but with full knowledge and acceptance of them. As they finally stood to go inside for the night, Delilah paused to look up at the stars one more time. Somewhere out there, beyond the desert and mountains, St. Louis carried on without her. Thomas was probably still living his life of comfortable mediocrity. The people who had whispered about her scandal had likely moved on to newer gossip. But here, in this place she had fled to in desperation, Delilah had found everything she never knew she was searching for. She had found home in the most unlikely place, love when she thought she was done with it forever, peace after years of turmoil. She had found Samuel, with his steady strength and gentle heart, who had proposed with wildflowers instead of diamonds, and loved her with a depth and constancy that still took her breath away. She had said yes through tears, and a heart finally at peace. and every day since had only confirmed that it was the best yes she had ever given. Looking at her life now, surrounded by the family they had built and the love they shared, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing. Every hardship, every tear, every moment of doubt had been worth it to arrive here at this moment of complete and utter contentment. The desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the promise of another day, another year, another decade of this life they were building together. And as Delilah followed Samuel into their home, she felt gratitude wash over her like a benediction. She had come west running from her past, but she had found her future instead. She had arrived broken, and the desert and Samuel's love had made her whole again. Years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. The children grew and changed, each developing their own personalities and dreams. James eventually took over more of the day-to-day ranch operations, showing the same steady competence his father had always displayed. Sarah, true to her independent spirit, insisted on learning everything her brothers did and eventually married a neighboring rancher's son, staying close to home and continuing to be involved in the Double J operations. Daniel's love of learning led him to pursue teaching, and he eventually became the schoolmaster for Sierra Vista, much to Delilah's pride and delight. And Grace, their youngest, grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's kindness and her father's strength, eventually marrying a doctor who set up practice in town and giving Delilah and Samuel their first grandchildren. Through it all, Samuel and Delilah remained partners in every sense of the word. They weathered droughts and floods, good years and bad years, cattle prices rising and falling, children's illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of life on a working ranch. But they faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing year into something rich and unshakable. On their 25th wedding anniversary, now in their late 40s but still healthy and strong from ranch life, they returned once more to the Wildflower Meadow. It had become a tradition, this pilgrimage to the place where Samuel had proposed properly, where they had talked about their dreams and built the foundation for everything that came after. The wildflowers were in full bloom again, as glorious as ever, and Samuel picked another bouquet just as he had done so many times before. But this time, Delilah noticed the silver in his dark hair, the deeper lines around his eyes, the way he moved just a bit slower than he had at 30. She knew she showed her age too, the years of desert sun and hard work leaving their marks, but Samuel still looked at her with the same love and desire he had shown that first day. 25 years, he said wonderingly, handing her the wildflowers. A quarter-century of marriage to the most amazing woman I have ever known. 25 years of loving the best man I could have asked for, Delilah replied, accepting the flowers and breathing in their sweet scent. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I got this lucky. Not luck, Samuel corrected gently. Choice. You chose to trust again after being hurt. You chose to build a life here when you could have returned to city comforts. You chose me every day for 25 years, and that is not luck. That is commitment and love and courage. Delilah felt tears spring to her eyes, as they so often did these days when Samuel said things like this. You make it sound so noble. I just knew I loved you and wanted to be with you. That is noble, Samuel insisted. Love is always a choice, Delilah. Especially the kind that lasts through decades and difficulties. The kind we have built together. They sat among the wildflowers for hours, talking about the past and the future. Their grandchildren were growing up, showing promise of being as remarkable as their parents. The ranch was thriving beyond Samuel's wildest early dreams. They had built something that would last beyond their own lives, a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of love and family and values worth passing down. As the sun began to set, Delilah rested her head on Samuel's shoulder and thought about that terrified young woman who had arrived in Sierra Vista all those years ago. If she could go back and tell that girl what her life would become, would she even believe it? The happiness, the fulfillment, the deep bone satisfying contentment of a life well lived and love truly earned. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, always attuned to her moods even after all these years. "About how far we have come," Delilah said softly. "About how that gunfight that brought us together could just as easily have ended differently. About all the ways life could have gone wrong but somehow went right instead." "I do not believe in much," Samuel said thoughtfully, "but I believe we were meant to find each other. Two wounded people who needed exactly what the other had to give. You taught me to open my heart again after Mary chose my best friend over me. I showed you that not all men are cowards and liars. We healed each other." "Yes," Delilah agreed. "Yes, we did." The ride back to the ranch in the gathering twilight felt peaceful and complete. Delilah looked at the land they had worked for so many years, the house they had filled with children and love, the life they had built from nothing but determination and hope and faith in each other, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a thing. They had decades still ahead of them, God willing, grandchildren to spoil and watch grow up, the ranch to continue improving and expanding, each other to love and cherish through whatever the future brought. But even if their time was somehow cut short, Delilah knew she had lived a full life, a life richer than she had ever dared dream back in those dark St. Louis days. When they arrived home, their youngest daughter Grace was there waiting with her husband and their two small children. She had come to visit for the weekend, bringing the grandchildren to spend time at the ranch they all loved. The littlest one, barely walking, toddled over to Samuel with arms outstretched, and Delilah watched her husband scoop up his granddaughter with a tenderness that still made her heart melt. This was what it was all for, she thought. Not just the land or the cattle or the material success, though those things mattered. But this: family, connection, love passing down through generations, children who grew up knowing they were cherished and valued, grandchildren who would carry forward the values and traditions Samuel and Delilah had worked so hard to establish. That evening, as extended family filled the house with noise and laughter and life, Delilah stood at her kitchen window looking out at the desert landscape she had come to love. The sun was setting in a blaze of color, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Samuel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood like that for a long moment, just being together, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. "Happy anniversary, my love," Samuel murmured in her ear. "Happy anniversary," Delilah replied, covering his hands with hers. "Here is to 25 more years." "At least," Samuel agreed, and Delilah could hear the smile in his voice. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Delilah thought once more about wildflowers and proposals, about tears and peace and hearts finally finding their home. She thought about the long journey from pain to healing, from betrayal to trust, from loneliness to love so deep it took her breath away. She had come to the desert broken, and the desert had helped make her whole. She had met a rancher who proposed with wildflowers instead of diamonds, who loved her with steady constancy instead of empty promises. She had said yes through tears, not of sorrow but of overwhelming relief and joy and the profound peace of finally coming home. And every day since, through all the years and changes and challenges, that yes had been renewed. Every morning she woke beside Samuel, Every evening they sat together on the porch. Every moment, big and small, they shared. She was saying yes again. Yes to this life, this love, this man who had shown her what it meant to be truly cherished. The house behind them was full of family and love and laughter, the legacy they had built together. The ranch spread out before them, carved from harsh land through determination and hard work. And between them was something even more precious, a love that had endured for 25 years and would endure for however many more they were granted. As they finally turned from the window to join their family inside, Delilah sent up a silent prayer of thanksgiving. For Samuel, for their children and grandchildren, for the life they had built in this beautiful, harsh desert, for second chances and healing and love that transformed everything it touched. She had proposed with wildflowers, and she had said yes with tears and a heart finally at peace. And that yes, that moment, had changed everything. It had led her here to this life, this love, this profound sense of being exactly where she was meant to be. The desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods outside, carrying the scent of sage and dust and home. Delilah smiled and took Samuel's hand, leading him back into the warm, bright center of the family they had created. This was her happy ending, and it was better than anything she could have written for herself. The wildflowers would bloom again next spring, as they always did, painting the desert in impossible colors. And she and Samuel would ride out to see them, as they always did, renewing the promises they had made among those flowers so many years ago. That was the beautiful thing about their love. It was not static or frozen in time, but living and growing and deepening with each passing year. As the evening wore on, and the children eventually packed up their own families to head home, Delilah and Samuel found themselves alone again on their porch, watching the stars wheel across the enormous sky. It was their favorite time of day, this quiet hour when the desert cooled and the day's work was done and they could simply be together. "I love you," Samuel said, as he had said countless times over their quarter-century together. But the words never got old, never lost their power to move her. "I love you too," Delilah replied, as she always did. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the years to come." And as they sat there together under the stars, surrounded by the land they had tamed and the life they had built, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly what she had been searching for all along. Not just love, though that was precious beyond measure, but peace, purpose, a sense of belonging so deep it had become part of who she was. The rancher had proposed with wildflowers. She had said yes with tears and a heart finally at peace. And everything that came after, all the joy and struggle and deep satisfaction of a life well lived, had flowed from that single moment of courage and trust and choosing love, despite all the reasons to be afraid. It was, Delilah thought as she rested her head on Samuel's shoulder and breathed in the clean desert air, the best yes she had ever given. And she would keep saying it, keep choosing him and this life, for as long as breath remained in her body. The desert stretched out around them, eternal and unchanging yet always surprising, harsh yet beautiful, demanding yet generous to those who learned its rhythms. It had welcomed a broken girl from St. Louis and shaped her into a woman strong enough to build a life worth living. And at the center of it all was Samuel, steady and true, who had seen past her wounds to the woman underneath, who had loved her patiently until she learned to love herself again, who had proposed with wildflowers and meant every word of the promises that followed. This was home, Delilah thought with profound contentment. This man, this land, this life. She had finally found where she belonged, and the peace that brought was sweeter than anything she had ever known. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the desert whispered its secrets to those who knew how to listen. and Samuel held Delilah close as they began another night in the long string of nights that made up a marriage, a life, a love story written in wildflowers and tears and hearts finally finding their way home.